Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We have a good one for you, as always. Here's what's on the show. We're talking about Liz Cheney. She ate it last night in her primary, and it's going to be up to the Democrats to really decide what she does next. But a lot of people have some very interesting future speculation and plans for her down the road. Exactly what she may be up to is very interesting for a lot of people. To discuss some of that. Also, progressives are applauding Joe Biden, but pledging to hold them accountable on some of the broader stuff on the passage of this kind of a shocking IRA bill that really nobody did see coming because of the fact that it was very last minute. Joe Manchin just walked away from the negotiating table, and now this passes. We'll take a look at it. Also, accused war criminal Eddie Gallagher is apparently training Florida cops on, quote, new ways of shooting. We'll take a look at that horrifying prospect in just a moment. Also, and finally, after first blaming errant Palestinian missiles, it does appear that Israel has now decided to blame the children, to admit responsibility for the killing of 5 Palestinian children a couple weeks ago, and just when they thought nobody would care anymore, well, guess what? We will still be following up. This is Newsflash. Thank you so much for listening. Let's start the show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get right into this today. We got a very good and interesting show for you. So we're starting at the top with Liz Cheney. Well, really, it's kind of a very interesting situation. Everyone kind of knew, including her, that she was going to lose this primary here. She was really down for the count for quite a while in that primary. It pretty much seemed to be making really very early on or late in the game. She was making the case on, really what she would do next in some places on TV. And now that she has lost, there's a lot of speculation. She lost by quite a lot, in the order of 66 to 25%, I think was the margin, with the rest of the vote split elsewhere. So Cheney of Wyoming was resoundingly defeated by Harriet Hageman in her Republican primary on Tuesday, handing Donald Trump his most prized trophy yet in a long campaign to purge the Republican Party of his critics. And boy, has he been successful in that front for the most part. But, anything, honestly, I think anything, Trump can lose here, or it's a pretty high price. I say Liz Cheney losing is probably 3 Trump endorsements going wrong. It's equivalent. That would wash out 3 Trump endorsements going wrong. That is how big it is for the president and his movement, because it really is. And when it comes down to it, it is a movement based solely really on the characteristic of spite, on the characteristic of just hating the fact that, you are involved with what you are involved in. And the fact that you have to deal with all these people in this country. I mean, his supporters feel that for everybody else, but Trump feels that for literally everyone in the world. But he views this below him, and I think that really does include his supporters. Hageman, she's a lawyer in Cheyenne with little political following before she was lifted by Trump's endorsement, trounced Cheney, the daughter of a former VP, by more than 30 percentage points, with more than 90% of the vote counted. Cheney's loss was as anticipated as it was consequential. She was the Republican voice against Trump, the vice chairwoman of the committee investigating the January 6th Capitol attack next year. She'll no longer have her perch in Congress from which to battle a figure she believes poses a grave threat to American democracy. Cheney conceded defeat just as the Associated Press called the race, suggesting she was trying to set a bit of an example in comparison to Trump when she lost. So Harriet Hageman has received the most votes in this primary. She has won. Cheney told supporters at a gathering outdoors on a ranch in Wyoming. Standing alone on the stage, she went on to implore Americans to fight back against Trump and others who deny his loss in the 2020 presidential election. No citizen of the Republic is a bystander. We cannot abandon the truth and remain a free nation. Hageman claimed victory at a rally in Cheyenne, lashing Mrs. Cheney, the elites in Washington, saying, "We are fed up with the January 6th Commission. We are fed up with Liz Cheney." As you can see in Wyoming, that is going to be the most popular position by, overwhelmingly. Wyoming obviously being the, far right Republican state that is, at this point, probably bound to be pretty darn fed up with the January 6th committee and with Liz Cheney. Her month was 2 months after George P. Bush's landslide defeat in a bid for Attorney General in Texas, represents the full and perhaps final transition from the GOP of the GOP from traditional conservatism. The traditional conservatism is really one quite delicious way of putting it there. The Bush-Cheney area, the just pure unbridled evil to, just the insane stupidity and, different kind of evil, I would say, of the Donald Trump administration. And that, that is what we are seeing really clearly right now. And pretty much anyone who hasn't, seen this coming for, the past 4 or 5 years has been not paying attention to politics. Donald Trump has had and really continues to have, for the foreseeable future, complete control over this party. You saw it when Ron DeSantis had to come out and defend Trump after the Florida raid on his state. He rushed to his defense there like it was literally nobody's business, which I think is very, very telling about where, even if DeSantis runs some sort of kind of a confrontational campaign against Trump in 24, I think it is very, very clear to say that he's going to have to, in some way, make nice to Trump, because he can't just do an 100% never Trump campaign, because that is just going to fail. He's going to have to say, I like Trump, but, and that is going to be a very, very hard case for him to make when Trump is still running in the Republican Party with the amount of support that he has. Other contest held Tuesday revealed the extent of the transformation. Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, another daughter of local political royalty and one of 7 Republican senators who voted to convict Trump of incitement and insurrection, is in a re-election fight against a field led by Kelly Shibaka, a Republican and former state official. I picture Trump trying to say that name. Shibaka, folks. It's Shibaka. She's great. And now she's a winner. Both women advanced in the general election, and 2 other candidates will join them as part of the state's top 4 system. So Alaskans are now also deciding whether to embrace a comeback for former Governor Sarah Palin, the one-time vice presidential nominee who's slashing attacks on the media prestige Trump's rise. Palin's running as both in a special election runoff for House seat and in a primary for a full term of her own. She advanced to the November election with Mary Peltola, a Democrat, and Nick Begich III, a Republican from Alaska's most prominent Democratic political dynasty. Results in the special election were not expected for several days. They got to pull up all the votes there on the dog sleds and run them to the counting center before we get anything there. Cheney, for her sakes, has vowed to continue her fight against the former president, casting the primary as the only one. There's only one front in a longer political war in which she's determined to prevail. So let's see if this will be a bit of a clip of her. That would be nice to see, wouldn't it? And let's see if this sounds like a woman who many people think is running for president. All right. We are having a little bit of trouble there with that audio. And with that being said, we're going to keep trying there. But a lot of people, they have talked
along with President.
Let's take a look.
2 years ago, I won this primary with 73% of the vote. I could easily have done the same again. The path was clear. But it would have required that I go along with President Trump's lie about the 2020 election. It would have required that I enable his ongoing efforts to unravel our democratic system and attack the foundations of our republic. That was a path I could not and would not take. No House seat No office in this land is more important than the principles that we are all sworn to protect. And I well understood the potential political consequences of abiding by my duty. Our republic relies upon the goodwill of all candidates for office to accept honorably the outcome of elections. And tonight, Harriet Hageman has received the most votes in this primary. She won. I called her to concede the race. This primary election is over, but now the real work begins.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it does kind of seem like somebody there has a little, she's ready to quote-unquote start the real work. And what a lot of people, including, Chris Cillizza, I saw this, he's normally one who makes some pretty insane points about the world of politics. But, he's the CNN political commentator over there. But he actually had a pretty good take with this one of, the possibility of Chris Cillizza, not Chris Cillizza, but Liz Cheney running a third-party campaign against Donald Trump and Joe Biden. There's no way Liz Cheney's going to get the Democratic nomination. I think that is going to be a pretty crazy thing to assume. But the question is, if Liz Cheney were to do that, and what type of campaign would she run? How would she go about doing it? And I think it's kind of clear she would go with the Republic is in danger. We need to do this to stop Donald Trump. She'd be running an explicitly anti-Donald Trump campaign. And that's probably mostly going to appeal to people in, certain suburban areas, people like suburbs of Georgia, for example, suburbs of, suburbs in Virginia, suburbs in Pennsylvania, suburbs of Philadelphia, like all those places where that really did power Biden to victory last time. Those are the places that Liz Cheney, I would argue, is going to target them most effectively with what seems to be her message, the January 6th committee message, the fact that we need to stop Trump because our republic is in danger. If that's not Joe Biden's message, I don't know what is. It's going to be appealing to the same people, and I think the chances are those people vote Biden no matter what, because why not vote for the real thing when he's still there, or vote for some kind of Kamala Harris type person, or whoever. If Biden does do a second term, I think people, honestly, it's possible people would probably just accept it because that's what we do with most things, but. If he were to do that, I really do feel like most people are going to go Joe Biden over Liz Cheney. And even if they don't, even if they still go Liz Cheney, that's going to help Donald Trump, which is what Liz Cheney doesn't want to do. I really don't see the logic of this campaign here, but it's going to be interesting to see if, more comes out on it over the next few days and weeks. All right, we're going on our next story in just 49. My name is Spencer Walsh. This is the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and if you're listening to one of our podcasts, whether it's Newsflash, Hidden History, The Spencer Walsh Show, or something else, ladies and gentlemen, we have one simple request of you. Please be sure to rate us, subscribe to us if you like us, and leave us a comment, because just like all of you, sometimes we need that feedback in our lives, good or bad. We want to hear what you have to say. So please do those steps. Make SWR and content better. And thank you so much for listening. We're talking about Joe Biden all day today and talking a lot about him signing the landmark IRA into law here. So economic justice and climate groups on Tuesday applauded the U.S. President Joe Biden signing into law the Inflation Reduction Act, with advocates hailing the $740 billion landmark investment in climate action, corporate tax reform, and healthcare as landmark legislation, while they pledge to continue working towards more ambitious reforms. So, this is definitely something that, we have almost the planned fossil fuel deals that are going to be, these are just like separate votes, but they're deals that Joe Manchin's been kind of assured that he would get in exchange for this bill. I mean, they would pretty much almost reverse the green energy spending that Joe Manchin, had to put in this bill, and the Democrats got through. But as Joe Biden said, it's law. The bill is going to include an historic investment of $370 billion to expand renewable energy infrastructure, caps prescription drug costs for senior citizens. Yeah, yeah, that's great. How quarter of the way there, because everyday people, or not everyday people, but younger people are going to need prescription drugs too. And pays for badly needed reforms by raising taxes on corporations. As the bill was signed more than a year after Biden's original proposal for Build Back Better, Representative Cory Bush said the IRA is a reminder we must never stop fighting to address the climate crisis because our planet and future is at stake. The bill's the biggest step forward on climate ever, Biden told the crowd gathered at the White House for the signing. Lisa Frank of the Environment America's Washington Legislative Office applauded the president for taking a huge step forward towards reducing U.S. carbon emissions. But Union of Concerned Scientists President Joanna Chow-Krelick said that by offering tax cuts and rebates for the use of renewable energy sources and creating an estimated 9 billion jobs over the next decade, the IRA marks a win for future generations who deserve our best efforts to secure a safer and healthier world. I think, a lot of these people, these Union of Concerned, Environment America, like all these really just no-name activist groups are not going to be, anyone's friend here in terms of actually demanding real change because, again, they are kind of barnacles on the Democratic Party apparatus here, which I think is something to certainly be taken into account. Let's see what Varshani Prakash of the Sunrise Movement had to say. She called the law a forced compromise between corporate oil lobbyists and young people who are fighting for a livable future. I think that's just definitely a great way of looking at it. Like, this is a forced compromise. This is, oil lobbyists who control the Senate right now, and young people, climate activists, like the Democratic Party, real constituency, electoral constituency. Those people are really kind of in what is a forced compromise right now. I think that's the best way to understand this bill as it goes on. And there are some more votes. Some more votes on some oil provisions that Joe Manchin has wanted to put up there and that people like Rashid Tlaib have pledged to stand in the way of. So that also is something to watch in the near future. All right, let's go on to our next story here. We got accused war criminal Eddie Gallagher, a military veteran who has been reliably accused of war crimes and admitted he killed a prisoner. This man, who pretty much got off on the result of just a really badly argued case, Eddie Gallagher is now going to be invited to train Florida police officers, folks. The police department in Tallahassee, Florida, found a surprising answer to that question of should he be allowed to come in, and the answer was yes. So yeah, he's accused by his fellow operators, his brothers, his band of brothers in the Navy SEALs, of intentionally shooting civilians and murdering a prisoner in Iraq. Shared a photo and video of Instagram last week in which he described working with Tallahassee police officers in close quarters combat and other lethal skills. He posted a picture of himself flanked by the rifle-bearing officers in Florida with this caption describing an awesome day of training with an extraordinary group of men who are ready to train and take on new concepts of shooting and CQB to add to their toolbox. It was truly an honor. I'm sure the citizens of Tallahassee feel that way too. Now they're the people who are meant to, protect and serve them, quote unquote, wink, wink, are now going to be kind of fully trained by a literal war criminal, or should I say, an accused war criminal. So yeah, the department did not provide an explanation of how or why its officers assembled for a group photo with Gallagher, whose current business endeavors included private instruction on weapons and tactics. Gallagher, imprisoned before his court-martial in 2019 as a free man because a military jury controversially decided he was not guilty of premeditated murder, and his conviction on just one minor count of posing with a dead prisoner was essentially overturned when former President Donald Trump granted him clemency. Not long after a trial and grant of clemency, the New York Times released a trove of evidence from Gallagher's fellow operators that laid out their damning case against him. The core problem here is not Gallagher or the Tallahassee Police Department. The conduct of each is a consistent, factor here in the decades-long meshing of military and policing. A violent disaster in America. The process was explored by Radley Balco's Rise of the Warrior Cop beginning in the 1960s, stepped up during the so-called war on drugs, and reached a terminal velocity after 9/11, when vast amounts of funding and weapons were poured into local law enforcement agencies, which deployed these resources mainly against minority and poor communities. one of the most notorious signatures of this destructive process is the Pentagon's 1033 program, which since 1990 has distributed more than $7.4 billion in military weapons, including armored vehicles, grenade launchers, and sniper rifles to police departments all across the country. So this is really here, this reporting from The Intercept on this situation, and it really is a great encapsulation. Like, these people, you should view them, in my opinion, as one in the same. Peter Moss writing this in The Intercept. If you look at what Eddie Gallagher did, posing and just relentlessly killing people abroad, enforcing the U.S. state's power, the worst parts of the U.S. state, enforcing their power over these kind of foreign lands, just really to do whatever they want. Police ultimately serve that same role here. They are there to remind you once and for all that you are, just the people who are going to be talked to. Like, you're the people who are going to be bossed around. You're going to be the people who are going to be in, your rule will kind of be, or your life will be subject to conditions that really they decide on, that they get to control. It only makes sense that you've got people like Eddie Gallagher and the Tallahassee Police Department sharing tactics, and I'm not surprised if he has plans to do this. Eddie Gallagher does in other police departments all across the country. So I think that is definitely a very, very interesting dynamic, to say the least. All right, now let's move on to our last story of the show today, a very interesting story. The Israeli military has admitted it killed 5 Palestinian children in Gaza earlier this month after initially claiming the atrocity was caused by an Islamic Jihad rocket that fell short. Very interesting stuff. And we really, what I think is just so delicious, time after time when it comes to the situation, every single time, and it really is a sign of that there is at least some sort of discourse shift, hopefully, on the Israeli-Palestinian situation, because they have had a long history of doing this, because Israel pretty much has a direct line to whatever, narrative they want, being able to push out there to the entire world. Like, they're able to, if they want to communicate it out to anybody, their lines are most often repeated by the media. The IDF pretty much is treated with, as a complete arbiter of truth by most mainstream media outlets. And that is really kind of starting to change, or at least they were, up until things like the Yishurin Abu-Akleh killing, where the Israeli government was pretty relentlessly fact-checked by quite a lot of, mainstream media outlets. They were really kind of fact-checked. They were pushed hard. I think CNN did a story on them. AP did a story on them, until they finally, admitted, or I don't even think they admitted, but because she was a little bit more of a kind of a high-value target than, I guess, 5 children were. But it does make clear that they really do have a pattern of doing this. Because they originally tried to blame the Yishurin Abu-Akleh murder on, stray bullets from a Palestinian terrorist. Even though there was no, Palestinians in the area. It was all cleared out for the raid, whatever. And now, of course, on the attacks, I think it was last week or 2 weekends ago, you saw what is becoming kind of a more and more common scene, which is Israel killing children, and then what they tried to do this time was say, it was a Palestinian rocket that fell short. The explosion took place around 7 p.m. on the 7th of August on the Al-Fallujah cemetery west of the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. The children killed in the Israeli attack were Jamil Nalmuddin, Jamal Najim, who was 3 years old, Jamil Ihab Jamil Najim, so probably like a brother, who was 13 years old, or Nathami Fayez Abdul Hadi Abu Karsh, a 15-year-old, and 2 more 16-year-olds, according to an investigation by the Defense for Children International Palestine. I didn't want to say, I really butcher those last 2 names. And I think really, what happens here is like this is just such really what kind of boils my blood about some of this just awful kind of Zionist propaganda here is with all these incidents, with the Shrina Block incident, with all these tragedies that happen to Palestinians that Israel just has no shame about. They know they did. They're in full knowledge. They know they committed this. It's not like they need to commit some sort of like investigation to find out the real truth. And they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, it was us, my bad, guys." They know about it from jump. They have cameras. They have every inch of Gaza, the West Bank, and the Israeli state itself, where Muslims live, surveilled up the teeth. And it really does kind of seem that this is something that like they knew about from the first point. And what do they come out and say? Oh, I guess it was the Palestinians' fault. The Palestinians were to blame. They're primitive. They don't know, they don't have these weapons. They don't have these rockets, but, every one of them are all terrorists who want to kill us. But they're too primitive. They're too unadvanced as a people to, be able to do this stuff, to fire rockets in Israel. So I bet it was them who killed the children. They accidentally fired on civilian areas. They accidentally shot one of their, best, most prized journalists because, that's just how the way they operate. They're not smart people, those Palestinians. That is, of course, that is exactly the implication there every time. And every time, pretty much, it is proven wrong. I haven't seen a single situation where there's, a big claim of, Palestinian, it was Hamas. They messed up. They dropped this rocket on a Palestinian Gazan area by accident. None of those claims are ever true because that is just Israeli government propaganda almost every time. There were among 17 children killed in the Israel 3-day military raid on Gaza that left almost 50 people dead and 360 people injured. Palestinian armed groups were firing rockets as Israeli military drones flew overhead, the DCIP reported. The group was therefore unable to determine the cause of the explosion. Immediately after the deaths, of course, several senior officers said the 5 were most likely killed by a misfired Islamic Jihad rocket, Haaretz reported. Despite the off-the-record assessment, senior IDF officers never commented publicly about who was responsible, according to Haaretz. But that record is never going to be corrected. It's just going to be viewed by most people in the world. They talk about that. Oh, yeah, they killed children, but, you got to forget, some of them were killed by a misfired Palestinian Jihad rocket. Nope. Just complete lies. So Israeli military spokesman Ron Kochab, here is this reporting is in the Electronic Intifada. I don't know if I've said that already. He told the media last week that 15 Palestinian civilians were killed by Islamic Jihad rockets that fell short during the 3-day bombardment of Gaza earlier this month, while 11 were killed in Israeli airstrikes. And the AP even verified that, so it has to be true. The new revelations in Haaretz on Tuesday invalidate Kochab's claim that the Islamic Jihad rockets killed more civilians than Israeli fire. The sources of 3 other explosions during the Israeli assault in Gaza remain unclear. The including explosion that killed 7 Palestinians, among them 4 children. The source of the explosion is still being investigated by the DCIP. No other human rights group has determined its source. The army publicly maintained the August 6th explosion was caused by Islamic Jihad rocket that fell short and has used the claim for maximum propaganda value. Israeli army, though, has a long history of lying in order to justify its often deliberate targeting of civilians, and the Israeli military's own propaganda videos show that it's capable of stinging civilians, including children, before it drops bombs on these targeted areas. If Israel is to be believed, then those who carried out the 7th August airstrike on the cemetery would have known that they were targeting civilians. Indeed, former Israeli soldiers, including told Israel's 972 magazine, the military's rules of engagement when dropping bombs on Palestinians allow for the premeditated killing of children. Conversation with Israelis who served in various units of the IDF intelligence corps over the last months revealed that during its military operations, in many cases, the army knows ahead of its attack that it would be killing unarmed civilians, the publication reported. And this was just last week this came out. The decision to kill them is not a mistake, but often rather a calculated and conscious one. The former soldiers testified that they were told by their superiors that there's a certain number of non-combatants, meaning families and children, that the Army is allowed to kill during operational activities. As long as this amount is not exceeded, the killing can be improved in advance. So this is what they do. This is how they decide, what the situation is, and how exactly they want to go about it. There's like 5 children, so that's about the limit. We can't do 6. Otherwise, the United States may get, a little bit too mad at us. And the population may get a little bit too restive. That is how the Israeli government operates. That's how they will always operate, because of the full backing they really do enjoy there from America. All right. That's all we got for you guys today. And we will see you on Thursday. That's tomorrow.